Let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a really critical debate that's happening right now in the UK Parliament. It's all about a promise made to the people of Hong Kong and whether some new immigration rules are about to shatter it.
Okay, so before we get into the thick of it, there are two key terms you really need to know. First is BNO, or British National Overseas. It's a unique status for people from Hong Kong. The other is ILR, which stands for Indefinite Leave to Remain. And that's the big one. It's the right to settle in the UK for good. For everyone on this BNO visa, getting ILR is pretty much the entire goal.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the original promise behind this whole visa. Then, we'll get into two controversial new hurdles that have been proposed. After that, we'll explore who exactly gets left out in the cold, and we'll wrap up with what MPs are demanding to make this a fair path forward.
Right, let's start at the very beginning. The UK's commitment. See, to understand why these new rules are causing such an uproar, you have to understand what this BNO visa was all about in the first place.
And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the debate. MPs are making it crystal clear that the BNO visa was never just another economic visa. It was created specifically as a humanitarian pathway, a lifeline, offered after civil liberties were cracked down on in Hong Kong. The crucial point they keep making is that this route was built on a moral responsibility, not on how much money an applicant earns.
And that brings us straight to the first major change that's setting off alarm bells, a brand new minimum income requirement just to get that permanent settlement status.
The number at the center of this whole storm is £12,570. The idea is, to get permanent settlement, every single applicant has to prove they've earned at least that much per year. Now that might not sound like a huge amount of money, but for a lot of people who came to the UK on this specific visa, it's a barrier that could be impossible to overcome.
This quote really just sums up the feeling in Parliament. You have thousands of people who made these massive, life-changing decisions to move their families here based on one set of rules. Now, to change those rules halfway through, well, it's seen as just deeply, deeply unfair. It's a classic case of moving the goalposts long after the game has already started.
So let's just unpack the four main issues that MPs have with this income rule. First off, it completely goes against the humanitarian spirit of the visa we just talked about. Second, many families from Hong Kong are what's described as asset-rich but income-poor. They might have savings, but they don't have a big annual salary. Third, it's a retrospective change. It changes the deal for people who are already here. And finally, it judges people one by one instead of looking at the household's income, which just isn't how most families work.
But the income threshold isn't the only thing causing concern. Let's move on to the second proposed hurdle, which just adds a whole other layer of difficulty, a much, much tougher English language requirement.
Okay, so the original requirement was what's called a B1 level of English. Think of that as basically an intermediate, conversational level. The proposed new rule, it jumps all the way to B2, which demands near-fluent conversation and the ability to build complex arguments. In fact, some MPs have said it's like the level of English you'd need to pass your A-levels. That is a massive, massive leap.
And this change creates huge practical problems. You've got thousands of people who've already spent their time and money studying for and passing the B1 test. With many of them due to apply for settlement in 2026, there's hardly any time to get to this much higher standard. There's also a very real fear that this could split families apart if, say, one parent passes the new test but the other doesn't. And, critically, there's no mention of any exemptions for the elderly or for people with disabilities.
So we've been talking a lot about policy and rules, but what does this all actually mean for people? Let's take a look at the very real human cost and who is most at risk of being shut out by these new rules.
Think about a retiree. Imagine they sold their home in Hong Kong, moved their entire life savings to the UK to live out their retirement in peace. They're financially self-sufficient, they're not a burden on the state, but they don't have a taxable annual income. Under this new rule, they would simply fail the test. Or what about a carer? In so many families, one parent stays at home to look after young kids or maybe elderly relatives. Their contribution to that family and to society is enormous, but it's not a paid job. With a strict individual income rule, that massive non-monetary contribution suddenly counts for absolutely nothing.
Then you've got the student. Picture a PhD student, maybe working part-time to help pay the bills while they study. Their income could easily fall below that new threshold, and suddenly they're faced with an impossible choice. Do I give up my education to go and work more hours, or do I risk my entire future in the UK?
And finally, think about the skilled professional, a doctor, maybe, or an engineer, or a teacher. They arrive here with years of experience, but then they face huge delays getting their qualifications recognized in the UK. So in the meantime, they have to take lower-paid work, and they fall short of an income threshold that doesn't even come close to reflecting their true skills or potential.
And look, the consequences of not getting that indefinite leave to remain are severe. For many, it means they can't get to their pension savings, which are locked away back in Hong Kong. For their kids, it means facing international student fees if they want to go to university, which can be astronomically expensive. Ultimately, it just leaves families trapped in limbo. They can't fully build a life here, but they can't safely go back home either.
So, faced with all these potential consequences, MPs aren't just raising concerns. They are actively proposing clear, common-sense solutions to make sure there's a fair path forward.
So here's what they're asking for. They've laid out 5 key demands to fix this. The first, and the simplest, is to just exempt the BNO humanitarian route from these new rules altogether. If that's not possible, then at least create transitional rules to protect the people who are already here. If there has to be a financial test, then look at the entire household's finances, not just individuals. And finally, create common-sense exemptions for vulnerable groups like pensioners and find a way to value those crucial non-monetary contributions like caregiving.
So, it all comes down to this one question, doesn't it? On one side, you have the UK's historic and moral promise to the people of Hong Kong. On the other, you have a push for new, much stricter immigration rules. The whole debate raging in Parliament right now is about where that balance lies. And for thousands of families, the answer is going to define their entire future.